So, as I covered yesterday, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won a massive victory over Joe Crowley in New York's 14th district. She's a candidate that was supported by Democratic Socialists of America, by Justice Democrats, by MoveOn.org, and a number of other progressive groups. Now, this was a massive win for the progressive movement, and Ben Shapiro was on Fox News to talk about it, and here's what he said.
What do you make of this? Is it an anomaly, or do you think this is a movement?
No, I do think this is a movement. I think the next wave of Democrats are going to be much closer to Bernie Sanders brand Democrats than even Nancy Pelosi brand Democrats. And what you see here is the sort of howling at the moon branch of the Democratic Party, in which they throw out whatever radical proposal they want and then suggest that this is truly authentic, that moral clarity lies in making proposals that are completely untenable, that will never be paid for. You know, this person was on MSNBC this morning, and she was asked specifically about how she'd pay for all of this, and she proceeded to blab for a solid 2 minutes without giving an answer to that question because she doesn't have a way of paying for any of this.
Okay. I'm going to break this down. Now, Ben Shapiro starts off by saying correctly that he thinks this is a movement, that this isn't just a one-off thing, that this is actually an indication of how Democrats are going to run in the future and how potentially a lot more Democrats are going to win primaries and elections by being more progressive, by being more like a Bernie Sanders style Democrat. So I'm completely with him on that. I think he's right. But then he says this. So he claims that Ocasio-Cortez, when asked about how to pay for these progressive legislation like Medicare for All, that she blabbed for 2 minutes without having a way to pay for any of this. Okay, so the interview that he is referring to was on Morning Joe, where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was interviewed for about 15 minutes. Here is the clip that Ben Shapiro is talking about, where she directly discusses how to pay for these policies. So you tell me if this is blabbing or if this is an actual answer.
A couple of other items on your policy agenda that you made very clear throughout: Medicare for all, federal jobs guarantee, and tuition-free public universities and trade schools.
Yeah.
Those look to a lot of people like promises of gifts under the tree, but they wonder how they'll be paid for. Now you're in a position to carry these out. How, at a time when the CBO says our debts and deficits are exploding and are going to cripple us, how do you pay for things like that?
It's an excellent question. First of all, I think we need to kind of look at the damaging history, legislative history of what we've done with our taxes. Not only did we have a $400 billion GOP tax cut that could have actually forgiven every single federal student loan in America. We spent that money in December, and we spent it on tax cuts for the corporations and the very rich. But it means reviewing the Bush tax cuts. It means making sure that also that we understand the power of the purse that Congress has, that, when the United States was in the Great Depression, that is when we pursued the New Deal. It was when people precisely said we have the least amount of ability to do this, that we actually committed to an economically ambitious agenda that transformed the future and the course of this nation. And I think that it is absolutely possible, but what it takes is the political courage to do it.
To raise taxes, to roll back the tax cuts.
And not only that, but also understand that that the federal government does have the ability, in the similar way that we had in the New Deal, to spearhead some of this agenda and some of that financing as well.
There you go. That's what Ben Shapiro calls blabbing on for 2 minutes. She directly answered the question. So here are some of the examples she used. So the recent GOP tax cuts for the rich. Those tax cuts could have paid for every student loan, could have paid off every student loan in America, instead of giving more money to the wealthiest Americans. There's one way. Reviewing the Bush tax cuts. So ending those Bush tax cuts. So again, these tax cuts that are taking money that could be used for these sorts of programs like Medicare for All and giving it to the wealthiest of people. These are direct answers. And she mentioned how there was a massive amount of spending that occurred under the New Deal. Now, I just went to Oregon, and in Oregon there was the Bonneville Dam, which is one of many public works projects that occurred under the New Deal, that were only possible because of the investment into Americans and into the infrastructure in America. So this Bonneville Dam was one of many projects that employed millions of workers all across the U.S., gave them a steady job, gave them steady pay, and was able to bring Americans out of the Great Depression because of the investment into the people in America. It's that easy. She answered the question, but Ben Shapiro lied. Now, I could end the video here, but let's go a little deeper, because I want to actually analyze why. Why does Ben Shapiro lie about this? Why is he so protective of these tax cuts? I mean, look, Ben Shapiro could have said, oh, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said she would pay for these programs by ending the Bush tax cuts. What a crazy idea. He could have said that. He could have been honest and said, oh, this was her idea. I don't agree with it, but that's what she said. But he didn't say that. He instead lied and acted like she didn't have an answer at all, when she in fact did. So why did he not want to mention the fact that she did talk about tax cuts? Well, let's go through it. So first of all, let me just show you that the vast majority of Americans actually think that taxes can be raised and should be raised on the wealthiest Americans and on massive corporations. Now, if Shapiro is so concerned about the deficit, then why isn't he concerned about tax cuts for the rich? So, even 2 GOP senators slammed the tax cuts for the rich that they themselves helped pass. But Ben Shapiro, no, he's not concerned about that. He's concerned about Social Security, Medicare, free stuff. Okay, but why is he so concerned about that and not about tax cuts for the rich that benefit nobody unless you are wealthy? Well, let's take a look. Public financial returns obtained by the Daily Californian show that every year, Young America's Foundation spends millions of dollars funding campus events such as Ben Shapiro's, propped up by tens of millions in annual donations from many wealthy, powerful foundations linked to prominent conservatives such as Donald Rumsfeld, the DeVos family, and Charles and David Koch. And when you look at the Young America's Foundation website, Ben Shapiro even has his own webpage. So these wealthy conservatives fund these campus events that Ben Shapiro speaks at, that he gets paid by this group to speak at. This group that is funded by wealthy conservatives that don't want to see their taxes raised. Now, maybe you think, oh no, David, Ben Shapiro just believes in tax cuts for the rich. It's in his heart. It's not because he's being paid for it. It's in his heart. He truly believes it. Okay, well, how about defense spending? So, famously, Ben Shapiro was pro-Iraq war. Here he is in 2005. Why war in Iraq is right for America. So, clearly, Ben Shapiro was on the wrong side of history. Now, you'd think that he would learn his lesson. He supported the Iraq war. It was clearly a mistake. So maybe he would learn from that and think, oh, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't be putting all this money into military spending because ultimately it leads to needless wars like the war in Iraq. Well, how about this recent bill passed by the Senate? $716 billion defense bill with support from Democrats like Dianne Feinstein, who Ben Shapiro considers to be a hardline leftist senator. Now, the hilarity of that is I discussed that in a previous video. But, okay, so even shitty Democrats like Dianne Feinstein supported this defense bill. Where is Ben Shapiro on this? So, Ben Shapiro also supports defense spending. So, first, let's look at how much America spends on defense. Right now, the U.S. spends more on defense than the next 7 countries combined. So, looking at the data and recognizing that Shapiro was wrong on the Iraq war and that the U.S. already spends a lot more on the defense budget than they actually need to, you'd think that Shapiro would recognize, hey, maybe we shouldn't be putting this money into the military. But no. So, Kyle Kulinski did a good video on this. Ben Shapiro, don't cut military spending, cut Social Security. So you can go watch that video if you want a deep dive on Shapiro's thoughts on military spending versus, free stuff like Social Security. But I want to actually dive more into, again, why Shapiro takes this position. So just like on the tax cuts, why does he take this position on defense spending, even though he's been proven wrong before? Well, again, it's all about the money. According to the nonprofit's financial forms, Young America's Foundation has spent about $54.3 million since 2005 on campus conference and lecture programs alone, which, as I said before, includes funding from people like the former U.S. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld and the Koch brothers, who have made tens of millions of dollars off defense contractors. But worst of all, we don't really know where all this money comes from. So Donors Capital Fund and Donors Trust are two nonprofit funds affiliated with the Koch family foundations, a common donation tactic that can often offer privacy to those who want to keep their contributions confidential. So ask yourself, how can these conservative voices like Ben Shapiro or Dave Rubin or Steven Crowder, how can they afford these professional studios with the staff, with cameramen, with directors? How can they afford all this? They have big money backing. The ideas they espouse are not their ideas. They're the ideas that are supported by the people that are giving them money. So this is what I really want to focus on, because it often gets ignored. People focus so much on the debate, the argument, without actually looking behind the argument, behind the debate. You have to understand what drives these people. So first, let me show you what drives somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Where does all this come from? How did you get so interested, so involved, so intense on all of these issues that threaten so many people's lives, that affect so many people's lives? Where did it come from in you?
Well, years ago, I had the honor of working for the late Senator Kennedy, which is when I really kind of fell in love with community work. But it's really my story and my background. You know, my father passed away when I was a teenager. My mother cleaned homes and drove school buses. And, you know, when my family was on the brink of foreclosure in 2008, my father passed away during the financial crisis. And that's why I started waitressing and bartending, so that she could keep her home. And so I understand the pain of working class Americans, because I have experienced the pain and I have experienced the urgency of this economic moment. And that is, you know, why I bring that urgency to this fight, because it is what we need as a nation. It's what working families need as a nation.
So that's her story. That's the story of a lot of Americans. A story of struggle, a story of wealth inequality, a story of not being able to get by because you are simply born into a life that did not give you what you needed. But with Ben Shapiro, what drives him? Really? Has he ever talked about it? Has he ever discussed why he is so passionate about lower taxes? Why he is so passionate about cutting Social Security? Why he thinks people shouldn't have health care? What drives that? Let me tell you what drives that. Greed. Money. All Ben Shapiro cares about, all people like Dave Rubin care about, is money. That's what drives them. So I didn't expect to put this clip in here, but I'm going to do it right now. Dave Rubin, why he left TYT. This could be a whole other video on its own, but it's involved in this conversation. So let me show you, from somebody who knew him very well, why Dave Rubin left TYT.
So I've been quiet about Dave Rubin for years, but I know Dave Rubin probably better than anyone else in this company because we were very close friends, okay? Went to dinner at his house every weekend, until all of a sudden he's not liberal anymore. All of a sudden, after getting some funding from the Koch brothers, he's now a libertarian. We'll get to that in just a second, but the reason why I have such a huge problem with Dave Rubin is because he's had Milo Yiannopoulos on his show twice, hour-long interviews, and Milo was able to say whatever he wanted to say without any pushback from Dave Rubin.
And what does Dave Rubin do? I don't know what to say about that. Just go.
No, it's actually worse than that. Dave Rubin sells it as I'm far more intellectual. And as a result, I refuse to engage in a debate or an argument. I allow people to make their case on my show. No, you're lazy. He was lazy when he worked here. He's lazy now with his ridiculous show where he proves time and time again that he doesn't know anything. And why do I know he's lazy? Why did he really leave the Young Turks? Can I please finally tell the truth about why he left the Young Turks? He wanted to make a 6-figure salary to host a 30-minute-a-week show when everyone here, because we work for an independent news company, was getting paid far less while working 12-hour days. That's why Dave Rubin left the company. And now all of a sudden he's getting funded by the Koch brothers, and all of a sudden his opinions are very different. He has no political identity. He is not an honest actor. He is not an intellectual. He is a fraud. Plain and simple, and he's giving platforms to people like Milo Yiannopoulos on his crappy show. That's who Dave Rubin is.
So that's what drives Dave Rubin. Money. He left TYT because he wanted to make a lot more money. And he found the way to do it. He discovered that if you become a lapdog for the Koch brothers, you can make a new career and make incredible amounts of money just by pretending that you are now a libertarian. So understand, there are people out there in media, in politics, that are simply driven by capital, by their own desire to make more and more and more money. So it's not just about the arguments that are laid out. It's about what is behind those arguments, what drives those arguments. Oh, but David, socialism is scary. Well, let me show you Ocasio-Cortez's explanation of what she sees as socialism.
Let me ask you about this label. So you call yourself a democratic socialist. You're a member of DSA.
Yeah.
There's so much interesting debate about what that term means in the year 2018.
Yeah.
What's it mean to you?
To me, and it is I think it's a big tent term, and for me, what it means is that in a modern and moral America, in a modern, moral, and wealthy America, where we have the capacity to ensure that every American can have health care and education and access to, dignified housing, we should be able to try to do that as a society by, whichever means we can.
Wow. Guaranteeing the basic necessities of life, health care, which I, as a Canadian, and the vast majority of the world already have guaranteed to them. Housing, education. So scary. Now, what people don't realize is the money is already being allocated, but it's not being allocated to the vast majority of people. It's being given to people at the top and to multinational corporations who are also at the top. These are the people that have all the power already. And they continue to squeeze you dry for every fucking cent you have. But sure, Ben Shapiro, who is funded by these people, yeah, he's on your side. Dave Rubin, who left TYT for more money, who was also funded by these people, yeah, he's on your side. Get real.